Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Bill Powers, and you are listening to Mining Stock Education. And in today's show, it's going to be a little different than most shows, which is the interview format. I'm actually going to be playing some highlights from a live investor summit that Carrie Lutz of the Financial Survival Network and I hosted for one of our sponsors, US Gold Corp. Presenting during that live investor summit was the 52nd Secretary of the U.S. Interior under the Trump administration, that being the Honorable Ryan Zinke. And although Ryan wasn't the only presenter, Ed Carr, CEO of US Gold Corp, was also a presenter. I'm just going to be playing the highlights from what Secretary Zinke shared during this live investor summit. You're going to be hearing me ask Secretary Zinke questions, a number of questions that came in from the live attendees. So I hope you enjoy Secretary Zinke's thoughts. He addresses mining in America, as well as his perspective on that and his role with the company, US Gold Corp, and how he sees US Gold Corp advancing its projects and how that fits in with what is occurring in the mining sector within the US. So without any further ado, let's jump right into it.
I look at the three things, fundamentals. One is geology, leadership, and lastly, timing. Clearly, U.S. Gold Corp has exciting geology. And we have a great team of geologists that have done this type of analysis in detail and before, and I'm very confident about the geology. The leadership, the core leadership is experienced. They've done a number of projects larger than this. This is a solid team. And lastly, timing. In this area where a lot of the mining concerns have been under pressure, certainly the administration has looked at the regulatory framework to recalibrate. I don't think there's any administration ever in the history of our country that has done more on reconfiguring the regulatory scheme so it does look at the environmental mitigation, but it also make sure that the regulatory framework is fair, there's a process involved, and it's timely. The market, looking at the market, we're in a strong economy. We think we're going to be in a strong economy the next, at least through this administration, in the next term. And lastly, balance sheet. This company has a solid balance sheet. This given in the background of nationally, the president released a critical minerals report when I was formerly Interior. That report looked at our nation's capability when it comes to mining. It's been challenging over the last couple decades. We've seen the coal industry on mining have enormous pressure. Some of our uranium, it extended across the spectrum. That is a national issue of national strategic importance to make sure we have a robust mining capability, not only in critical minerals, but minerals used for manufacturing. And certainly as a nation, we don't want to be held hostage by foreign entities for our critical minerals and those minerals that are used in manufacturing, et cetera. Along with that, the core competency, as in Wyoming, for instance, enormous pressure on coal. Wyoming's very excited about that find in Wyoming. The government is working hand in hand. Their balance sheet as a state has been under enormous pressure as of recent because of the diminishing coal demand. We think we can be very helpful in mitigating some of that pressure on expanding the opportunity in Wyoming. Nevada has always been a mining state and remains so on both sides of the aisle. Very supportive of the mining industry, as well as there's mines logistically that are operating in the area. So it's a good fit. I'm excited looking at, again, the geology as a geologist from University of Oregon. Dave and the team has looked at this. I've reviewed the analysis of it. We think we're in a very, very strong position. And I think looking at the accessibility and where the plays are, relatively straightforward, which is great. So I'm excited to be a part of the team. I think it was mentioned before. I just like to win, and a smaller cap company that does have the right leadership, strong balance sheet, good geology, and what I think is to be an extraordinarily great future and run. Excited to be a part of the team. Okay, now I'm looking forward to questions.
All right, at this time, we are
All
going
right.
to field some questions. This is Bill Powers, Secretary Zinke. There's been a number of questions that have been submitted. Question: with the gold mining mergers and acquisitions, how do you see this cycle impacting your projects?
I think as far as the industry itself, there has been a lot of mergers. It is resource intensive. There has been a number of challenges, worldwide on mines and mining companies, particularly in Brazil, that have been under pressure from not following best practices, best science, and not looking at the risk portfolio. I think that separates out U.S. Gold Corp. Is we have a team that fully understands the necessity to make sure we have best practices, use best science for the longest term, greatest good, and look at the fundamentals of the geology, and then make sure the mining plan and everything involved in that, we don't skip steps. We go through the process. We make sure we have local support, local and state support. We make sure that we go out and talk to the ranchers. We make sure we talk to the folks around, and we make sure we do it right. And I can't overemphasize doing it right. That means we don't skip any steps. We make sure we mitigate any environmental concerns, and we work with a team to make sure that U.S. Gold Corp is elevated as the gold standard, pardon the pun, of the industry.
Secretary Zinke, a question for you is, investor wants to know, what will be your role with the Copper King project in Wyoming? Could you elaborate? And what will be your role with the Keystone project?
My role is as a senior advisor. I have a degree in geology, and as a former state senator, congressman, and 52nd Secretary of Interior, I think there are few people that understand the process more than I do about how to get from A to B to C and all the way through to have a successful project of this nature. In Wyoming, I'm a Montanan. Wyoming's a great state and certainly been hit hard on the economics because of the diminishing coal market. And miners are really, really good people. So being able to talk to people, make sure we have the right set of skills necessary to go forward. Make sure we don't skip any steps. Make sure that we go out and talk to the local community, talk to state officials to make sure that we're transparent, they understand what our goals are, and be part of the leadership team to make sure the balance sheet is strong, to make sure our investor base is well informed, that we're transparent about where we're at and in the business development model. But I'm happy and excited to be a part of the team. I have absolute full confidence in Ed and the team. I was asked to join and delighted to be a part of it.
Secretary Zinke, this question is for you. When you were the Secretary of the Interior, was gold spoken of as a critical metal, or what discussions did you have about the gold mining industry as Secretary of the Interior?
Well, gold is not considered a critical mineral per se. but there's a lot about the mining industry that are components of a healthy and robust mining industry. Best practices, new techniques. To a degree, Australia has led the world, most recently in promulgating what I would say cutting edge technology. And we can be a beneficiary of that technology. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. But certainly having a robust mining industry in the U.S. was talked about a lot at the highest level to make sure that, again, as a nation, we're not held hostage, whether it's from copper or gold or any critical mineral. As a former Navy SEAL, in regards to critical minerals, there is dozens of critical minerals that are required even to outfit a single SEAL or special operations personnel on the battlefield. And in many cases, China has monopolized a lot of the resources, either the mines themselves or the market. And so having a healthy mining industry and using best practices, cutting edge science, I think is a component of having a overall healthy mining industry. And gold has its play. Gold has a lot of similarity in the mining techniques as other minerals, but being able to look at the techniques, the different industry components, and make sure you have the right skill, not only in the geology as an exploration company, but make sure that you have the right skill on those that are drilling the sites themselves. And it does take a lot of skill. That's why I'm excited about the leadership team. We work very, very hard. I'd say we work as hard as any SEAL team I've been on to make sure, we do it right, to make sure we look at the cutting edge technology and techniques that are out there, and we implement those techniques, one, to control costs, but also to get better results. So, overall, mine industry is taking some hits in the last decade, but it is cyclic, and I think with better techniques and, again, incorporating the best technology in the industry, whether it's U.S. technology or looking at Australian technology and the paste and the tailings, and even when you're doing exploratory holes, that's an important aspect of U.S. Gold Corp. And many of us have been around the world. We've traveled a lot. We're familiar with the mining industry. And when we come across a great technique, we're willing to adopt that, what I would say for greater good of the industry as a whole.
Secretary Zinke, the follow-up question is, do you think that gold could be considered a critical metal in the sense that it adds to the economic security of the United States because it is considered money?
Well, it is an argument that is certainly, those that deal with portfolio management look at diversity, and gold is, one of those key components of a portfolio. To a degree, mitigates the risk of economic downturns back and forth. Our nation itself, I would rack and stack gold probably below, lithium, cobalt, and some of the hot minerals that are being used for the energy sector. But gold has been a stable, and I don't see gold going away. Not in my lifetime or my grandchildren's lifetime. So I think as far as the stability of the market, gold certainly has its role, and those companies that mine well have succeeded. A lot of it is controlling costs and to make sure that when you look at a project, you do a very detailed assessment of the geology. You make sure you have a great leadership team in place, and lastly, does the overall federal and state governments, do they support that activity? In this case, with the Trump administration, there's no doubt that mining and having a robust mining industry is part of the agenda at the top of the leadership. And in the case of Nevada and Wyoming, both traditionally a strong mining state with good support both at the private and public levels.
One more follow-up question, Secretary Zinke. If Trump is not reelected in 2020 and you get a Democratic president that's not as less restrictive in terms of overseeing the U.S. Secretary of the Interior the way you did, could that hinder greatly some of U.S. Gold Corp's projects?
It's hard to say. Nevada, it's in a state that's very pro. Wyoming, I don't think there's much risk either way in Wyoming on copper. There's always policy at the highest level. When a policy is made, how much does that trickle down to a specific project? Certainly very supportive of the administration. I think the reset on a lot of issues, trade imbalance, our ability to access resources on public land, provided you do it right and you follow the rules and you mitigate the environmental impacts and all those things, and multiple use of properties, making sure you have local and state support. I think the fundamentals remain strong regardless of which administration. I prefer the Trump administration because I was a part of it, and I agree with where the president has placed his priorities. So I'm fairly confident that these projects won't be severely affected. And I'm fairly confident, quite frankly, that the president will get reelected.
What influence, if any, do you see on the Keystone project from the Barrick-Newmont joint venture Nevada gold mines?
There is an influence because it's close by. The proximity is close. Certainly, I think they're looking at resources. Every mine has a beginning and end based on resources. For those operations in close proximity, I'm sure they're looking at it very closely to look at the proven reserves, the economics of it, as their play eventually diminishes on available resources. It makes sense in many ways for an adjacent concern to look at nearby assets without and incorporating the infrastructure they have in place. So I think it works in our favor to have operating concerns and interests within close proximity. So to the degree you're not too far isolated. With mining, it's just not only mine itself; it's making sure you have the infrastructure in place to move the material to where it's going to be processed. And in cases where you're isolated, that becomes more problematic. So I think it works in U.S. Gold Corp's favor to have interests, particularly in Keystone nearby. Well, and as Ed has pointed out, is that in the analogy of an elk, if you're looking at a enormously large elk, sometimes it's better to hunt closer to a road so you can get it out.
At what stage would you look at bringing on a JV partner? And in Nevada, typically, when do you see exploration companies partnering with the major gold companies?
I would say that this is why a leadership team is so critically important, because joint ventures, junior or senior partners, has to be a good match. It has to be a good match for shareholder value, for the culture of it, and also you want to have a good match between the leadership and make sure you have common objectives and goals. And that's why, at the heart of it, I mentioned you have to have good geology but the leadership portion of it is so critical to have the right team to make sure that shareholder value is looked at in terms of making sure the team is well suited to the task, that has the right resources, conducts the right practices, uses best science, and if a partner or a joint venture should appear, making sure that match is well vetted and in the interest of the shareholder. Well, in some of the background of the industry as a whole, as you have mergers, some of the mergers have carried with it the legacy projects that have liability, from either environmental liability, from reclamation, to lawsuits, on these previous mining techniques, that, mining itself, the industry has evolved. So how mining techniques were used in the turn of the last century, the use of arsenic, the use of toxic chemicals, the treatment of it, the environmental impact and downside. Some of the balance sheets have an enormous amount of liability. Looking forward, U.S. Gold Corp doesn't really share that doesn't have that liability on legacy projects. So that's why we look at the cutting edge techniques, even on exploration holes and mining plans, to make sure that we don't carry that long-term liability. And that's why making sure we're cutting edge, look at proven techniques, using best science. That's the part of the U.S. Gold Corp legacy that we bring to the table. Is we don't have the burden that has, to a degree, I think, adversely affected the mining industry. Certainly from a narrative and a PR point of view. I'm from Montana, and a lot of people still look at Butte, Montana as how not to do it. We're not in that position, and that's a good thing for U.S. Gold Corp.
Investor writes, U.S. Gold benefits from a very accomplished and talented management team and board with emphasis on ESG. What do you think the mining industry can do better to demonstrate its commitment to environmental stewardship, and how can U.S. Gold play a role to change public perceptions of extractive industry?
Well, I would say the mining industry, pursuant to the earlier conversation on legacy, from a Montanan to grow up, the mining techniques of the past, have created, a lot of problems today in reclamation. There's somewhere in the order of maybe 1,500 or 2,000 mines that have yet to be reclaimed, that still have, toxins and a number of cleanups. So I think the mining industry itself needs to reflect on the modern techniques, needs to reflect on how technology similar to the oil and gas revolution in this country, looking at the best techniques, using the best science, I think is an important aspect of it. And also not, on a national scale, we don't ever want to be held hostage for critical minerals, or not have the capacity for copper, iron, gold, and for the key components of mining. So I think, to a degree, the environmental movement has certainly, I think, put a highlight on some of the earlier practices, and America's responded, and I think the mining community has responded. It's not just about jobs; it's making sure you do the job right.
Yeah, and the asker wrote in and said environmental and social governance is what ESG stands for.
And on the social side, this is why it's so critically important to make sure you have local community and state support. I've seen projects where well-funded projects will go in, and they really don't have the local support. Some of it's lack of transparency. Some of it's not working with the local communities, not working with the Indian tribes, looking at the cultural aspects of the project. So that's, I would say, critically important to look at where the project is and cast a wide net, to talk to local people, make sure you're transparent, look at the data and the project as a team, rather than the mining concern and everyone else. This is where, I've seen some great projects over my tenure, and I've seen some projects that could have been great, but they were fumbled and mishandled because they didn't take the time to do the process right, and they didn't put the resources behind it to make sure that you do communicate with all the stakeholders.
Question for Mr. Zinke. In your opinion, do you think that the general perception of gold amongst Americans and its historical basis of value could change to the positive, and therefore the future share price of U.S. gold would benefit from it?
Well, a lot of people just love gold, and I'm one of them. Gold, the price has ebbed and flowed. Some of it, in times of instability, gold tends to rise. But I think gold has been over time to be a solid investment, and certainly gold remains the standard, worldwide for a lot of reasons. So I think a lot of it has to do with continuing to explore and to continue to look at the right and left boundaries of the find, to continue to do the assessment of what the deposit looks like in detail. That then transcends to the ability to go to the market and look at the options, whether you're going to, as Ed talked about before, the options are, you can always joint venture. There's advantages and disadvantages to that. You can go it alone, it requires capital, or you can outright sell. Those value decisions, a lot of it has to do with what is the deposit, what is the geology. In the case of U.S. Gold Corp, both in Wyoming and Nevada, very, very positive, very confident geology. So that works in our favor. Certainly the leadership part that has looked at the balance sheet continues to have great fundamentals. And lastly, looking at the market and what's the future of gold mining, I think it has been cyclic. I do think the mining industry itself can play a role of making sure the public relations and folks understand that we're not a Berkeley pit type of operation in the latter part of last century. This is a different techniques, and mining has evolved too.
This question is, as technology continues to advance and gold deposits become easier to find, do you worry gold will flood the market and therefore lose its value? So it's a question beyond just U.S. Gold Corp as a company.
Well, and I would say to Ed's point that the easy access to gold primarily has that phase has been completed globally, with the possible exception of, that's what I was reading the paper yesterday, a couple was out walking their dog named Lucky in Australia and came upon a 20-ounce gold nugget.
Wow.
I don't think that happens a lot, but I think now we're looking at the accessibility of where the gold is. Gold is still rare. Geologically speaking, gold is rare. And when you have a deposit of, you do an analysis of this size, then I think you're always going to be in a good position.
Thank you for listening to this Mining Stock Education podcast. Please subscribe and share with like-minded investors. Visit us on the web at MiningStockEducation.com for more resources on precious metals and natural resource investing. At our website, you can also sign up for our free newsletter for interview transcripts, stock picks, and more.